was on a steamer coming over. Life began all anew.
Welcome back to The Place of Places, an in-depth analysis of William Saroyan's 1972 memoir, Places Where I've Done Time. Today we examine Chapter 11, Captain Heath's Office, Steamers Division, the Southern Pacific, Embarcadero, and Mission Street, San Francisco, 1926. We learned that William left Fresno for Sonora to work at the U.S. Forestry Service. But once there, he didn't like the setup and took a train to San Francisco. There, he was hired at the steamer's office for the Southern Pacific. The offices had just expanded in January 1926, utilizing the old ferry post office, San Francisco's main post office, that was built in 1915. From 1925 to 1933, it served as the Southern Pacific Transportation Company offices. This building is now on the Register of Historic Places, and until 2015 was the Amtrak bus terminal between San Francisco and Oakland. Captain Charles F. Heath was the superintendent of the steamer division of the Southern Pacific since 1917, and he would still be there in 1938. William tells us he was a retired ocean-going captain who had taken the easy post of managing the passenger ferry boats plying back and forth between San Francisco and Oakland, and the river boats that went up the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers to Stockton and Sacramento. Whatever ocean-going days he had must have been brief for him to have such a long career as superintendent. He was still alive in 1957, so he was probably younger than Saroyan initially thought. His father, Charles R. Heath, was a captain of steamers, but he retired in 1918 and died at age 78 in 1926. In 1926, neither the Golden Gate Bridge nor the Bay Bridge, two of the most iconic bridges that symbolize the Bay Area, were built, although dreams of mammoth bridges were in sight in the 1920s. Those bridges weren't completed until the mid-1930s. Passenger ferries moved people between the growing cities of San Francisco and Oakland. We also have a reference to these in Chapter 8, when William briefly lived with his mother in San Francisco and then took the ferry to Oakland when the orphanage called him back. These ferries were a lifeline for the economy of the region. The river boats that went from the Bay Area to Sacramento had been running since the gold rush, having transported miners, merchants, and gold between the mines in the Sierra Nevadas and the cities of San Francisco and San Jose. In San Jose, the gold amalgam was separated from other minerals in the rock with quicksilver. In San Francisco, the gold was minted and the business end of the gold rush occurred. It was also the main port that brought people from all over the world to California, typically from the east through Panama. By 1926, these boats were still in use, albeit with less at stake. The gold rush ended in the 1850s, but commerce continued between Sacramento and San Francisco, now linked economically and to this day politically. So before he is allowed to start working, William has a physical with a staff doctor, a surly old man. Saroyan tells us that he likes asking questions if the answer might prove interesting and it's free. So he asks, "Is anything wrong?" The doctor responds, "You'll live. Forever, most likely." Again, this fits in with the themes of life and death in the book, and through all of Saroyan's books, really. This quote brings to mind the book titles Not Dying and I Used to Believe I Had Forever, Now I'm Not So Sure. In fact, on his deathbed, Saroyan called up the Associated Press to include in his obituary the following statement: "Everybody's got to die, but I've always believed an exception would be made in my case. Now what?" Was the conversation with the doctor real or imagined? And if it was real, was it a poignant moment that stuck with him for the rest of his life, as some indicator of his immortality? He certainly believed in an enduring life force, perhaps not physical, but one that persisted after death. Even while still alive, in 1966 he created the William Saroyan Foundation to manage his literary estate, as a way for his writing and influence to endure in future generations. Saroyan quits the steamer office after 8 or 9 days, and enjoyed the hustle and bustle of typing fast, running errands quickly, and generally moving. His energy was so frenetic that when the captain asks him to take his cap off when he's indoors, young William agrees, but doesn't actually take the cap off, as it would slow him down. Annoyed with this anchor and probably at having to defer to authority, he resigns from the position, writing a resignation letter that would make Zola proud. This could be referencing Émile Zola's lengthy writings, or perhaps his exposé of the Dreyfus affair, in which he wrote a letter to the president, published by the French press, that was so damning of the military that it led to criminal libel charges. So Saroyan's resignation letter must have been epic. Saroyan just didn't do well with authority, whether it was his Uncle Aram, random bosses, or even the U.S. Army, which he had a pretty bad relationship with. Part of it was favoring the freedom of youth. There are many instances in which we see this preference for the joy and naivete of youth before we decay into adulthood. For example, in The Flashing Dragonfly, originally printed in Nugget magazine in 1962, and then collected in I Used to Believe I Had Forever, Now I'm Not So Sure in 1968, he writes, "Whoever the kid had been, whoever had the grand attitude, has finally heeded the admonishment of parents, teachers, governments, religions, and the law. You just change your attitude now, please, young man." This transformation in kids, from flashing dragonflies, so to say, to sticky water surface worms slowly slipping downstream, is noticed with pride by society, and with mortification by God, which is a fantastic way of saying I don't like to see kids throw away their truth, just because it isn't worth a dime in the open market. The simplicity of youth is something he tries to hold on to throughout his life, but the typical responsibilities of adulthood, and especially mid-century American ideals of manhood, kept him unsatisfied. He frequently attributes this restlessness to passion and madness. Soon after he left the steamer office job, his brother Henry secured him a position with the Postal Telegraph Company, which we learned more about in Chapter 8. Soon he became the youngest manager of an office, and this was more comfortable for him, taking instructions from no boss and earning the freedom to come and go as he pleased, which was his natural, restless state. He ends this chapter, "I was bored, and I wanted to take a boat and go somewhere. That's all it really was." This is reminiscent of another quote from the book Short Drive, Sweet Chariot from 1966. He's describing working in the vineyards around age 15, when he asks a boy slightly older what he wants to be when he grew up. The boy responds, "Passenger." This was exciting to hear, and definitely something to talk about at some length, which we did. He wanted to be a passenger on anything that was going anywhere, but most of all on a ship. Again, there seems to be some connection here, as if Saroyan was always taking notes in his mind, ready to adopt the habits and advice of others to guide his own life journey, always favoring the freedom of choice and autonomy. Let's put this on the Saroyan map and move on.